Chapter 13. Dreamless this time, I drifted in a void that was only my own being. Surrounding me, as much as I could call it me, was nothing. Not darkness per se, or any other shade of color. It was an absence of existence. I myself was also without body, being only a thinking entity. This was new, right? Did that mean I was doing something right suddenly? A snap of realization hit me. Everything so much more sense to me now. I was stuck inside of myself because of the barrier I put around myself to stop the ooze was still active, wasn't it? My conscience couldn't slip back through the ink that was still inside of me to that other world, to my other self, who I now realized wasn't as dead as I had originally assumed. What I saw in my dreams weren't dreams at all then, but me waking as my other self? How is it possible? I knew enough about magic to realize that I should have died almost a week ago. That was the nature of the Denique Veneficus, after all. It used my life force in order to heavily magnify my casting capability. All of it. That meant that either something was keeping me alive on the other side, or... well, it had never been proven or disproved, really. It was just a theory set aside until alternate dimensions were stumbled upon. If the Einstein-Rosen bridge could be crossed, they debated that time flows between dimensions might not entirely match up. I always just stopped paying attention when parallel universes and doubles started getting mentioned, though. Prior to suddenly finding myself as a pony, it didn't exactly have a lot to do with my life. Essentially, from what little I understood, the theory was that time might move slower or faster in different dimensions. Normally a moot point, as most dimensionally traveling objects got squished into a fine singularity after entering the more traditional wormhole. Something tells me that my case is slightly different based off the fact that I was somewhat more alive than I'd be otherwise. What did that mean, though? Ultimately, it came down to only two things. Something might be forcing me to stay alive, which was really bad news if they had me. Or time was moving so slowly that I hadn't died yet. Better for a question, worse for me. Now that I had found these ponies, I suddenly realized I didn't want to give them up. But I was either on a time limit until I died or holding a link open from hell itself directly to their doorstep. What was I supposed to do? A stirring. My body recovered from its exertion enough to regain consciousness, it seemed. Slowly, my eyes cracked open. A lavender mirror staring back at me? Check. Feeling like icicles stuck to my chest? Check. Symbols covering my skin holding back a hungry eldritch abomination of quantum physics? Check. Still in Equestria, I see. Oh, you're awake. Thanks, Celestia, Twilight Sparkle muttered, exhaling weakly. Honestly, unsure of what to say to her, and suddenly feeling a little uncomfortable, I simply nodded quietly. Her eyes softened, lowered a little as she saw my reaction, and she looked away. Chin up, ponies! He's alright, so don't let the silly thing from yesterday stop what's important! I heard Pinky chime in from somewhere behind me in a surprisingly whimsical voice. Twilight sighed, but nodded. Her head slowly lowered and rested on the edge of the couch I resided on. She's right. I apologize for my horrible behavior. I didn't know how to react and freaked out. Plus all of this happened. If you'd been at the library, I might have been able to help you. After what happened yesterday, I should have realized I needed to keep an eye on you. This is all... She exploded into apologize, burying her eyes into the edge of the couch. Twilight, I interrupted, if only to get her attention. She stopped and looked up at me, tears now going down her cheeks. I shook my head gently, however, and smiled at her. Once I had her attention, I continued with, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, so I'm sorry too. I've been thinking about it a lot all of last night, and I think we need to talk about it later. But there are more urgent things for now, she muttered, nodding again but looking away from me. This I wasn't expecting. She acted almost ashamed of herself. I sighed, but was interrupted before I could say anything further. Agreed. For example, properly thanking you for the hocus pocus you did to get all that stuff off of me. That looked mighty painful for you from mine, Applejack suddenly added, popping upside down into my field of vision from above. There was a light bruise on her cheek and another on her neck from what I could see. Based off Fluttershy's recovery time, that meant I must not have been unconscious long. I chuckled and reminded, I was the one that put you in that danger in the first place. If you'd gotten hurt. Trailing off, I sighed. Yeah, I was selfish sometimes. Ultimately, I didn't want to die. I wanted to stay here in this amazing heaven I found. But it looked like my time was running out and it came down to dying or potentially killing every pony here. Was there really a choice? This isn't your fault, Mender. I finished compiling the results of my readings from yesterday. Your arrival was purely by accident, and those rocks caused the link still in you to resonate, become active again, Twilight explained. I nodded weakly. I'm connected to my world still, and now I'm acting like those rocks and trying to pull anything with a life signature through that link, I confirmed, not really feeling the energy she had found somehow. Still, she had come to the same conclusion I had. Her eyes lit up, and she suddenly smiled. Yes, that's what the readings say. It explains all of the tiny discrepancies I noticed around the crater. My machine was picking up on you as well. It was coincidental that this dimension passed close to yours at the exact moment from what I've gathered so far. The only two questions that remain are, how did the connection form, and why is it still stable? She speculated, sitting down on her haunches again and looking perplexed. I'll give you insider information. The original me is still alive. Somehow, I revealed, sighing. I might as well give her as much information as I could. I didn't see what any of this would do, as what was coming was pretty much inevitable. Twilight's eyes widened, and I heard both Applejack and Pinkie gasp. Does that mean you're two ponies at once? Pinkie asked, sounding amazingly fascinated. We were interrupted by a light snoring sound following. That's hogwash! Blinking, I and every pony else in the room, I momentarily turned towards the older mare with the light lime coat. Wait, I thought I'd seen her last night. Oblivious, her snores continued regardless of the new influx of attention to her. Applejack coughed lightly, sounding a little embarrassed. I'm mighty sorry, folks. Granny's not used to having to get up this early. Don't mind her, she muttered, cheeks flushing a little. Twilight blinked as well, then shook her head and shrugged before looking back at Pinkie Pie. You're not far off, Pinkie. So those dreams and visions were dimensional bleeding, not memories. That explains why Mender displayed elevated PTSD symptoms. But what made the link, and how are you still alive? It would require a massive amount of energy to open even a temporary gateway. Twilight remarked, looking back at me and seeming flustered. She flipped open what appeared to be the same notebook from yesterday and started rapidly going over her notes. I hadn't considered that. Post-traumatic stress disorder by itself would have been just fine, but I guess a dimensional bleed version. I'm lucky like that. Still, it was kind of refreshing to slip back into magical discussion so naturally. It felt like it was comfortable to me. I felt safer on topics where I could actually contribute. Now wait just an apple buck a minute. You're saying that he's acting like a link to the place he's from? Applejack asked, looking flustered. Twilight seemed perplexed, but simply nodded. And now every pony that pokes him gets pulled away to that there other world? She continued. I nodded this time, wondering where she was going with this. Then, what happens when that one on the other side kicks the bucket, so to speak? She asked, uncertain this time. Ah, that's where she was going. Twilight frowned, and her eyes drifted down towards her notes, as if trying to draw assurance from them. I don't know. There are theories, but... She spoke uneasily, before trailing off. Mender's gonna stick around, though, right? Came the uneasy voice of Apple Bloom. I glanced over my own body and spotted her sitting next to Pinkie Pie, both on the other cushion of the couch. Pinkie looked surprisingly thoughtful, but Apple Bloom was watching me with a rather sad expression. She was worried? I hadn't thought I'd made that good of an impression, unless Sweetie Belle had been talking to her. Out of the three I'd met so far, she seemed like to like me the most, anyway. Twilight looked torn and started flipping through her notes again. I saw a few strands of hair that were splitting off from the others at odd angles, and she looked stressed now that I looked closer. Was it because she stayed up to it analyzing the readings, or because of her freak out yesterday? Silence held for several moments, and I sighed. She didn't want to say it, and I sort of understood why. I'll say it for her, then, as it had to be said. Anything could happen. I might be fine and the link shattered, or I might be reliant on that form and fall apart without it. Alternatively, I might keep functioning but slip into a coma, my mind leaving with the link. We don't know. I spoke up, feeling gloomy. Applejack let out a frustrated snort and came around the side of the couch, stomping her hoof and glaring at me. She looked a mess, honestly, with bruises covering her entire front and both forelegs. We ignored her and she gave me a determined nod. Well, I said pony feathers to that. That just means we gotta hurry up and do something about it, she declared. I was slightly taken aback that it must have showed as she got a confident smirk on her expression after a few seconds. What do you propose? Todd asked, looking surprised as I did. Easy peasy. We'll just send some pony through with a link to Twi, then have her do that teleport thing she's so good at on both the pony and Mender's twin back. Patch him up good as new, and we're all fine and dandy, she elaborated, whacking the floor with her hoof to punctuate each step. Twilight stared at her as if she were crazy. A light smile spread across her face, however. It was rather simplistic and a few parts needed expanding upon, but honestly, it was a better idea than I had, although I had no idea how I could be two people in one spot. It's feasible, although a lot more complicated in execution, I agreed, looking at Twilight. She seemed to be the undeclared leader of the group, plus I trusted her extensively when it came to magic. My experience with her was limited, but aside from this, she had always been stable and knowledgeable. She watched me for a few seconds before nodding. Well, maybe. It might work, but we'll need to figure out how to make a safe portal first, she finally admitted, looking a tad flustered. I raised an eyebrow to her, a little confused by her tension. Was she still upset about yesterday? Well, it seemed unreasonable to expect her not to be. So I dropped the nose to the floor, along with the quill, and sighed weakly, finally looking away from me. I scoured the library last night on anything to do with dimensions and came up with pretty much nothing. Theories and speculation don't help us, and the potential risks are massive, she warned, hanging her head and letting her bangs cover her eyes. What choice do we have, silly? We need to do something to get him to feel better, right? You seem pretty concerned about him, Pinky added, back to her usual sing-song mannerisms. Well, she technically spoke true, as I doubted I'd get better on my own. Twilight surprised me by simply blushing and remaining quiet. Pinky got a knowing grin on her face, but relaxed into the sofa again. I was about to question Twilight when a quiet, "Oh dear," sounded from the doorway. Glancing over, I saw the busted front door open again, and Fluttershy came in, followed rapidly by Rainbow Dash and Rarity. Fluttershy looked momentarily taken aback before rapidly trotting over to where I lay. So I watched her curiously as she brushed her hoof timidly over my skin, causing a ripple to go along the symbols. It's warded, I assured her, finding the energy to smile at least. Something about her presence was comforting regardless. There was something, an echo in my mind when she spoke. What was that? How are you feeling, Mender? Rainbow Dash asked curiously, sitting to the other side of Twilight. Her question snapped me out of my sudden trance, and I glanced back over at her. Applejack snickered though and bumped her sideways with her flanks, spilling her off her hooves. Probably a tad sore from when you dropped him on his head, right? She reminded, winking down at the now blushing Sand Pegasus. Pity I knew it probably wasn't guilt tinting her cheeks, but Applejack's flank instead. Hey, if he lost the bear when he passed out, I would have been toast if I was still carrying him, she protested, waving her hoof dismissively towards Applejack. True enough, I could take a meter drop or so. I wasn't sure how she could survive being eaten by an eldritch abomination. Rainbow Dash. I stared at her for a few seconds before I got a twinge in my head and winced. Tot and Fluttershy both started and leaned close to me, and the former asked, Are you alright? Oh dear. Perhaps we should get him someplace warmer and a bit to eat? Rarity suggested, resting on her haunches in front of Pinky's spot on the couch and frowning at me. I closed my eyes for a few seconds as another wave of dizziness crept over me. Hermond was in the dream. Was it a dream? I doubted it. Those colors. That meant she was connected to that day. I looked over at her upon opening my eyes and found her also looking at me. Then I noticed they were all looking at me, having heard Fluttershy and Rarity. Jessica was surprised to be locked into my focus, however, and tilted her head. I watched her for a few more seconds before asking quietly, Rainbow Dash? Were you practicing above the field of the day of the really bad storm? Her eyes widened in surprise, and every pony turned to look at her, Twilight grabbing her nose again with record speed. Wait, how the heck did you know about that? She asked, looking honestly surprised and vaguely angry. Swallowing, I realized I was right. Twilight was right. Did you do a sonic rain boom that day? I asked weakly, starting to get a bit apprehensive. Things were starting to slide together again. It was starting to look bad. Rainbow's eyes narrowed as she glared at me, but Twilight shuffled forwards a little. Please, Rainbow, it might be important, she requested. I don't see why it's any pony's business what my training regimens are, she protested, crossing her forelegs in front of her. Why didn't she want to answer? Please, trust me? I asked tiredly, shifting so I could see her better. To my surprise, her eyes softened when I said that, and she sighed, looking away. I do trust you. Fine. I was practicing skywriting. I got it in my head to try the message more awesome with the sonic rain boom. I haven't gotten it down to an exact science yet, and I knew I'd be busy with the storm later, so I was practicing earlier in the day, she finally answered. So that explains why she didn't want to say anything, with the pony of her affections being in the room. Did you pull it off then, Rainbow? Applebloom asked with a bit of excitement in her voice, surprising me. She hopped up, using my left flank as a stool for her two front legs, grinning at Rainbow over me. Rainbow smiled at her, irritation apparently somewhat disarmed by the little filly's cuteness. Yeah, once. I was ecstatic until I realized it didn't mix well with the rainbow trail and turned my message into bits of burning rainbow falling towards the field, she elaborated, blushing again. Somehow, I managed not to laugh. Yeah, that wouldn't convey that particular message with the best presentation. Nothing says I love you like burning chunks of rainbow falling from the sky, I suppose. However, it all slid together in an instant. Applejack snickered and nodded to Rainbow, helping her up as Twilight turned and looked back at me questioningly. Yep, it told me what I needed. The rocks and I arrived at the same moment if Twilight's theory of dimension shifts was accurate. We were faced out of my reality the exact second my spell activated. It dug into me to use my life force to fuel it at the same moment the atmosphere exploded from the energy of the planet bluster. It had been known to happen before. Barriers were conductive to other forms of energy, and it must have gathered it like a lightning rod. Then, as Twilight said, the dimensions shifted close to each other, and Rainbow Dash did her sonic rain boom in the same area, generating a huge amount of energy on this side and forming the link with the resonations. Due to the time differences, she actually had a feasible window of opportunity to do so, I calculated. Of course, her rain boom wasn't on the same level as the planet buster, so there had to be some localization involved. The field she was in was probably close locally to my area through the dimensional phasing. The probabilities surrounding the event were phenomenally mind-boggling. Regardless, the rain boom synergized with my barrier, which was tied to me, and I bled through, splitting my life force and having a new body form due to the regenerative effect it had on me before the battle started issue. Probably, anyway. But why a pony? My deductions sort of dwindled at that point. Oh well. It hardly mattered, as I had most of the pieces to the mystery. I must have zoned out for a few moments. Mender? Are you okay? Twilight asked, looking concerned. Yeah. I think I was one of those burning bits of rainbow, Dash, I admitted, swallowing. Both Twilight and Rainbow's eyes expanded to the size of saucers. Stretching, I tried to keep warm in the high-altitude air by rubbing my forelegs together. It didn't help much, and my coat ended up puffing anyway. It was still a beautiful view, however. The hot air balloon swayed gently in the wind, and I was positioned so I could look over the side. We were quite high up, and the view was amazing. Gentle moisture from the clouds around us clung to the side of the basket, and suddenly turned to frost. It was a peaceful, if not melancholy, environment that I drew comfort in. The sea of clouds washed away the view of the ground far below, and it felt like my worries went with it. Twilight's sensor device continued to make a light ticking noise behind me, and I heard the light scribbling on her floating notepad next to her as she glued her eyes to the device. This is crazy, she muttered again, after looking from the dancing lines across the paper readout. Remember, I snickered from the other side of me, and I heard shifting of leather.
You just said that already, Twy. But you know we don't have time to be sane, Rainbow remarked, sounding deceptively excited. I could tell. Even with the potential danger, she was getting giddy. She seemed to be the type who loved the adrenaline rush. We need to think this out more. If anything goes wrong, anything at all, it could mean getting lost in a totally different place, possibly forever, Twilight warned, looking exasperated. Rainbow rolled her eyes and sighed. And if we don't hurry, what's the risk of some horrible race of unstoppable monsters invading and destroying like everything? She returned, adjusting her wings again. Fluttershy stood behind her, slowly manipulating the series of leather straps that Rainbow Dash wore in the makeshift harness. Embarrassingly enough, with my current level of strength and barely having the ability to walk by myself, I wouldn't be able to hold on to her at normal speeds, let alone the velocity we needed to accomplish opening a gate. Thus, the harness. I'd recovered some of my strength after waking up, but I was nowhere near the level I was before, which was to say, I was even weaker than my prior pathetic self. Twilight looked beyond frustrated, but she nodded sharply, accepting the point. I had to agree. There was no way of knowing how risky it was without leaving an open connection to those monsters, because I knew full well what they were capable of. Without the ability to experiment, this is the most accurate method possible. Recreate the angle, location, speed, and even the mare involved. This is the best shot we have, I added, shifting my attention to the ground instead. I know. I just really don't like having nothing really solid to go on. Plus the planners, two of my best friends, she muttered, checking her reading for probably the 100th time. Best friend? She hadn't known me for a week yet. I took a rain check on my thoughts, deciding that they might be a little too cynical. I rephrased it a little before voicing it. You've only known me a little less than a week, though, I pointed out, deciding that was phrased a little less venomously. Twilight stopped taking scribbled notes and looked back over me, a slight saddened expression adorning her features. You think too little of yourself, Mender. I think I speak for every pony when I say you're a good pony and a friend, she reiterated. I'd heard her say it before, but it was more than a little difficult to actually listen to it, to believe it. Was I a good pony? I didn't want to die, honestly. If that's what it took to destroy the link, what was I supposed to do? Could I honestly live with myself if I potentially doomed this entire dimension to repeat what happened in mine? No. As much as I didn't want to admit it, the question was honestly bigger than I could ever hope to be. Was it too late to be a truly good individual, though? We're doing this to save you, right? That has to prove that we're your friends. Fluttershy spoke quietly, agreeing in a hushed whisper. I nodded gently, still plagued with guilt over my own feelings, and wondering how much easier it would get to simply topple over the edge of the balloon. No more choices, no more greed or selfish impulses. Aquatia's problems would be erased along with my life, and ponies could move on without me, no longer in any danger from them, the Grosh. Shuddering at the name, I found myself considering me more as an intruder, a disruption, than just a traveler. If I was truly a mistake, it meant I didn't belong here to compliment things. No matter how kind and friendly I tried to be, no matter how friendly they were to me. Twilight swallowed uncomfortably in the silence, eyes filled with unease and apprehension. She looked stressed, like she had a horrifying secret bottled up for centuries and desperately wanted to pull it out of her. Well, I probably saw it as more dire than it was, but she certainly looked strung out. Just be careful today, both of you. You two need to be alright, okay? She requested, eyes softening as she looked down again. Relax, Twy. I'm a pro at speed, so there's really no danger, Rainbow half-assured, half-bragged cockily. Twilight let out a giggle and seemed to agree, smiling quietly at Dash. She trusted her, obviously. Rainbow's boisterous nature served to vent the stress of the situation amazingly as well. She kept things light-hearted, similar to Pinkie Pie. She also distracted them from all noticing I made no such promises. If it came down to either myself or Equestria, no matter how vague the potential threat might be, I vowed to make the correct choice. I turned and looked back over the side, lowering my eyes and steadying my resolve. I needed to focus. We were at the right altitude, a direct angle to the crater point at roughly 85 degrees and a good half-dozen kilometers off the ground, moderate cloud cover around us. A light parting of the clouds occurred, and I watched the four flags being erected on the ground level by Applejack and Rarity. They were lined up with the crater and angled to face us as we stayed anchored above the calculated point where Rainbow fired off the sonic rain boom that day. It was a simple plan. fire another one off at the exact same spot with me in the middle of it, and try to open another stable portal. Easier said than done, I know. Failure at that step meant pretty much nothing, however. I saw the pink pony circling below us still on that strange gyrocopter machine she had. She had finished setting up the large net directly in our path of descent. I checked the velocity and mass calculations myself, and both Twilight and I agreed that it should stop a potentially lethal fall should the portal fail to open. Rainbow thought it was unneeded, but Twilight insisted on it. I wasn't worried about the Sandman's ability so much, but on the effects on trying to pull this off with me on her back. A solid 5 minutes passed in silence before Twilight put her new rather sizable notes down again. Okay, from these calculations you're right. I triple-checked the results dozens of times, so there's not much else for it. In theory, repeating the same experiment as close as possible should yield the same results. Twilight agreed, finally giving me a weak smile. On the bright side, things were significantly less awkward now that she seemed to be frustrated about something other than me and her flank. Still unsure if that's a good thing, but I'll have to look into it more at a later date. Well, provided I was still alive. I nodded quietly, smiling back at her. You did the calculations right. With the time-lapse variation, our window should be wide open for a good 48 hours. We can try this as many times as needed today and still have clearance to try something else if it doesn't work. And empirically, this is our most accurate shot, I reminded. Her eyes softened towards me and she nodded, a genuine smile appearing on her face this time. Rainbow snickered behind me and I braced for a verbal impact. I never thought I'd see another pony who can say so much, yet nothing at all, she remarked. Hey, just because you don't understand doesn't mean he's not saying anything, Twilight defended, much to my surprise. She actually defended me. Well, technically herself too, but still. Relax, Twi. I'm just happy hearing all the magic dork babbling cheers you up. Or is that a hint of hot and bothered I see in your eyes? She questioned, teasing playfully with a wink. So it switched to a shocked and blushing in a heartbeat. Fluttershy, however, jerked stiffly while adjusting in the middle backstrap as if burned, and Noah instantly let out a pained choking noise as she flailed her forearms, eyes bugging out. I tried my hardest not to laugh, as it was rude for one, but would also draw attention to my lightly flushed cheeks. Fluttershy was scarlet and gawking bluntly at Twilight, body rigid. Twilight stared back awkwardly, blushing lightly before coughing. Fluttershy seemed to notice what she was doing to Rainbow a few seconds later. She made a squeaking noise and slid the strap back into place, somewhat blushing even more than before. The Cyan Pegasus gasped and fell to all fours, holding her neck with one hoof while glaring back at Fluttershy. Twilight glared at Rainbow instead. Okay, you deserved that, she muttered, shaking her head and wearing a victorious smirk instead. Her cheeks were still bright crimson, but I said nothing lest she kick me out of the balloon this time instead. Rainbow sighed and sat up again. I was just kidding, sheesh, she defended, rasping. Rainbow, I muttered, frowning towards her. Her eyes lowered away from me and she nodded. I know. I got you in trouble once already because of my mouth. Honest, I was just teasing, she swore. Twilight raised an eyebrow at her, however. Wait, you never got him in trouble. What are you talking about? She asked. Huh? How is being kicked out of the library not being in trouble? Rainbow seemed to silently agree as she tilted her head towards the lavender unicorn. Fluttershy also seemed to be recovered from the massive blood rush enough to give a questioning glance at her as well. Twilight, you kinda kicked him out of the library. I'd say that's as in trouble as it gets with you, no? Rainbow pointed out, flexing her wings out again. She had such a way with words. What? No, I didn't kick him out. I just didn't want him in the loft that night. Is a little privacy so wrong? She reasoned, defensively crossing her forelegs. I rotated back around to face them again as the whirling noise ascended to my right. This wasn't going to be pretty. Ooh, but Fluttershy said you hurled his bed down the stairs and almost flattened him with it, Pinky exclaimed merrily, leveling her copter off with the height of the balloon. What? Twilight yelped, turning and glaring at the new verbal assaulter. Fluttershy blushed but coughed. Well, you kinda did. No offense. Please don't be mad, she muttered weakly. Hey, it had a good couple meters of clearance from me, I tried to defend.
Rainbow burst into laughter, and Pinky looked deeply amused. Twilight blushed furiously and looked down at the floor of the balloon.
You could have stayed in the library, Mender. Just, not in the loft. She addressed directly to me.
Fluttershy looked sad and beat me to the responding, unfortunately, asking,
You wanted him to stay in the main floor where all the ponies visit at the night draft?
Oddly, there was a slight hinting of disapproval in her voice.
No, she was planning on throwing him in the basement,
Rainbow Dash muttered sarcastically, rolling her eyes.
Ooh, spooky!
Pinky added, sounding oddly excited. Fluttershy gasped, now looking horrified and apparently having missed the sarcasm completely, somehow. Twilight glared at Rainbow Dash instead.
That's horrible! How could you, Twilight? He's sick!
Fluttershy protested, a few decibels louder than usual. Gullible, but very loyal. I caught myself blushing again.
I was kidding, Fluttershy,
Rainbow groaned, slapping a hoof to her face.
Fine, I'm sorry. I know I overreacted. I'm not comfortable with things I can't study and have no experience in.
She apologized, flopping onto her forelegs. I nodded gently. I know how you feel. A lot of things can be really scary when you know very little about them. I agreed. Twilight smiled up at me softly, looking grateful. Pinky giggled and nodded behind her as well.
Then you just need to get to know him more, right? He's not going to hurt any pony,
she reasoned, smiling while hovering closer on her machine. Sighing, I slid down the front of the basket and sat tiredly on the floor. I'd never hurt any of these amazing ponies. Fluttershy sat down half a meter away and looked at me with concern. Twilight, who was already sitting, frowned as well and scooted closer.
Are you all right?
She asked hesitantly. I'm just a little tired. I'd never hurt either of you. And I understand why things the way they are, I assured quietly, looking down instead. Rainbow raised an eyebrow, but Fluttershy tilted her head and asked,
What do you mean?
I shook my head weakly, not really wanting to discuss it. Rainbow surprised me by suddenly letting out a gasp followed by a feisty glare.
You never told me what was wrong,
she suddenly announced out of nowhere. Huh? Pinky giggled lightly above me somewhere.
You likes Fluttershy, duh! Her saying that would kinda hurt,
she explained for me. My secret, being told, didn't really even register in my mind as I continued blankly staring at the spot on the balloon's gondola's wall, somewhere between Dash and Twi's machine.
What?
Rainbow Dash gasped, looking stunned.
Pinky! How did you find out?
Twilight half asked, half reprimanded. Fluttershy looked down slightly, but also wore a light blush. I shifted my attention to her. Pinky giggled again, sounding like she moved closer to the gondola wall.
Well, it was super duper obvious, but my Pinky's sense was twitching when he looked at Flutters. And Twilight too. Some ponies rather indecisive, she exclaimed mirthfully, and I felt the hoof patting me on the head. My eyes drooped, and I nodded weakly, looking at my hind legs. This is probably strange posture for a pony, but I didn't really care. If I'm still alive by the end of the week, I'm going to have to figure something to fix that, I muttered, mostly to myself. Fluttershy frowned and shifted closer to me, putting a hoof on my left back knee. We're all 4 knees now, or were the 2 front elbows. Twilight maintained a blank expression, but I saw her swallow uneasily. She knew that not surviving was a possibility. Don't be a frowny face. Dash will make sure you're totally alright. She's an amazing flyer,
Pinky assured it in a softer voice. Dash smiled and nodded confidently, walking towards me.
Don't worry about it, Mender. I'm sticking with you through the whole thing,
she assured, a twinkle dancing in her eyes. She still looked excited but proud, confidence almost dripping off of her. It was hard to resist her energy this time, and I smiled and, as well, nodding back up at her.
Then let's get this over with. Hit him hard and fast, then we can be home and laughing by the end of the day,
she offered, extending her hoof towards me, still smirking. Nodding, I hooked hooves with her and let her pull me into the sitting position. She nodded and turned away from me, lowering herself to the floor of the gondola. I closed my eyes, gathering my confidence up again, before stepping slowly onto her back and into the harness.